Hi, I'm Jamie.
And I'm Scott.
And welcome to God or Not, the podcast where truth springs from argument among friends. This is episode number 4. And coming up, Scott and I will be talking about morality. Also in this episode, low blow. So grab your popcorn, sit back, and enjoy the show.
Ladies and gentlemen, please direct your attention to the center ring. This is the God or Not podcast. We're in for a great night of civil discourse here as these two warriors are revved up and ready to go. And now, let's get ready to dialogue!
Episode number 4. This is 3 more than I anticipated when we first got started.
Yeah, so we've already quadrupled your expectations.
We have. If only my stocks and my mutual funds had done as well.
Yeah, well,
I might be doing this podcast from my yacht.
Or having your staff do it for you.
That's right. But instead, here we are. That's okay.
Now you're stuck with me.
I wouldn't say stuck. Sometimes I'd say stuck with you.
Yeah.
Other times it's not so bad.
That's why it's stuck, right?
That's right.
That's why it's stuck.
So today, if you remember, right, we were going to have a discussion about morality. So we had talked about objective morality in an earlier episode, and it's such a huge topic and so rich in ammunition. And there's so many weeds that we were going to move into morality part 2.
Right.
And what we got instead, though, what our listeners are going to be surprised with is that it really isn't much about morality.
Kind of. I mean, there were bits in there.
Sure, but
that was kind of the underlying stuff there.
Yeah, it was. I would say more, though, some kind of nuts and bolts, kind of inner workings of the podcast. So when Scott and I decide to do a topic and things like that, obviously there's twice as much, maybe 3 times as much discussion about how we're going to do it, who's going to take the burden of proof, things like that. And this happened to be one of those conversations. And when we were done, we thought, boy, this was a good learning experience for us. And also we thought, well, maybe it might benefit our listeners. Maybe they'll be able to listen to it and think, well, hey, 2 people can work things out and come to some kind of agreement. So it was a nice discussion, and I think things came to a head, but then we were able to plow through and work some things out.
Yeah, so this is kind of like an example of what maybe one of our planning sessions would sound like. Because we were kind of discussing, okay, we want to do this, and how are we going to approach it, and that kind of thing. And so it's like a meta discussion, really. We were talking about how we were going to structure the actual discussion, which was to come later.
Right. And so there was obviously some disagreement, but ultimately, you and I are both pretty hard-headed, and I think that we both decided that come hell or high water here, we're going to make this thing happen. So we just we've had several of these discussions. This just happened to be one that we caught and we got on recording, and so we decided that we'd go ahead and share it, and would be really interested to hear what you guys think. If you think that this is a good way to communicate, if you guys think we did a good job of kind of working out some of our differences. And so we would love to hear what you think. And at the end of the show, we'll give you information there on how you could get in touch with us. And speaking of getting in touch with us, since our launch, we've gotten all kinds of pretty good feedback. Scott, what have you been hearing?
Well, we're a week into it now, and some of the feedback is starting to trickle in. We did start to get some emails coming in, and I think we've decided we're going to at some point soon, maybe even next episode, we're going to respond to some of that email. We've been responding via email, but we're thinking maybe including some of the more interesting tidbits in a listener mail segment. And so all the listeners out there, if you have questions or comments about the show, email into us. Maybe you'll be featured on one of these these email listener mail segments. Also indicate in your email. Now, we're not going to guarantee that you're going to get on the show or anything, but just in case, tell us whether or not it's okay to use your name. Otherwise, we're going to assume that we won't use your name.
Right.
And
so we will, we'll be probably starting that next week. And but I did get some feedback on Facebook, and one particular bit of feedback is that there's maybe a little too much banter between you and I.
Right.
Isn't
that the whole point of the show? I thought that was like the main thing.
My wife says I could talk a leg off a table, which is probably true. But
we got a minister and a teacher. Okay, sit back and relax.
Yeah,
we're going to be talking here. So just you knew what it was when you signed up.
That's right. But
so
you know what?
In
all fairness, we love to hear things like that because that'll help us focus and kind of guide how we structure things. And so, of course, we can't guarantee that we're going to obviously do all these kind of things if you send them to us. But you know what? I will say for that person who put that out there on Facebook that we are that these conversations will probably get shorter as we get better at it, and as we progress through some of these episodes. I think you'll see some of the discussions, some of these prior discussions. Maybe the appetizer, won't be quite as long, and we'll be able to get to the main course more quickly. So,
but you got to cut us a little bit of slack here. We're just started, right? This is just our brand new. We're excited about this thing. We want to talk about it. We want to, and so, just like any movie, there is some exposition that needs to take place here.
That's
so,
right.
So hopefully we'll get a lot of the explanation out, and it's kind of ironic that I'm rambling on now, explaining about how we're going to be explaining.
I was just going to say, with that in mind,
so
without further ado, without further ado, the God or Not podcast gives you episode 4. This is titled Morality Part 2.
This is the main event. Round 2.
All right, we're recording.
No, so I don't know. It just seems to me that if you assume that naturalism is true, and then we try to decide if we could have or arrive at some kind of objective basis given that. And then we say, well, if theism is true, would it make sense of objective moral values? Which makes the most sense of objective moral values?
Well, I would argue that mine does either way. Even if there is a God, I would still argue that paying attention to well-being makes more sense to be a moral standard
than God's objective standards. If there is a God, like you would have to know. No, you would have to know what God's.
I wouldn't care what God's impression was. I wouldn't care. No, that doesn't matter to me.
Okay,
I'll still make the argument that it's better to be concerned about world well-being than it is to care about what God wants to do or cares to do.
But what we're trying to find out is what makes the most sense.
Right.
Of objective moral
that's
values.
what I would argue. Yep, I agree. And I think it would make more sense to use well-being as a standard for moral values.
But see, well-being is a part of mine. Could be a part of mine as well. It's just not my point. It's just not my yardstick. It's not the thing that is dictating. It's just part of the thing. So,
right. And I would argue that not using it as the thing, using other things as your yardstick would make less sense.
I claim you don't even have a yardstick. I'm claiming you may have up. See, what I'm saying is I think that objective moral values in human flourishing is an offset of the yardstick. It's not the yardstick itself.
Oh, I disagree.
But see, that's what we have to decide. What is the objective standard? Under naturalism, does that make sense? Under theism, which makes more sense? God's objective. If there is no God, can you really have a yardstick? And my answer is no, you can't.
Oh, definitely. You definitely can.
Well, that's why we're having objective moral state too.
Right. And so I would argue that, but if we're gonna approach it a different way, because my understanding was that you were using this as some sort of evidence for God.
Well, you're using it as evidence for naturalism.
No, I wasn't.
So what are you using it as evidence for? That you have an objective moral standard?
I'm using it as a counterexample to the moral argument, to show that the moral argument does not support that there is a God. The moral argument depends on the assumption that you cannot have an objective moral standard without a God. And I'm saying, yes, you can. And
okay, well let's have this discussion then. I'm ready. So let's do this. Let's make this the standard then. Which best fits an objective moral standard? Naturalism or theism?
Okay, well that's gonna scratch. I mean, that's basically throwing out most of the outline.
All right. Well, so then what's your question? Like what are we talking about? What am I trying to defend?
Well, again, my assumption was, and apparently I was mistaken, and I'll own that, and that's fine.
I may have been completely wrong, dude. I'm not pinning on anybody. I just want to know what you want to talk about tonight.
My assumption is that because I was assuming that we were using this as this was one of your four pillars, right? Your four evidences for God. Right. The moral argument, which basically says you can't have an objective moral standard without a God.
Right.
Premise 2, we do have objective moral standards, therefore there is a God. Okay? And so my argument, my whole presentation about using well-being as a moral standard is to be a counterexample to the first premise.
So you're basically saying that this can be the yardstick.
What I'm saying is that we can have a reasonable, objective moral standard without a God.
Okay, let's do it.
And what that does is that counters that first premise. And I mean, is that how? I mean, am I off there or what?
Well, no.
What were you thinking?
I was just, for some reason, I was thinking that part 2 wasn't any different discussion, just an extension of the first one. So we were just basically going to be talking about what best represents, or what best I'm having a brain fart here. What best explains objective moral values, theism or naturalism? I thought we were having kind of a just a kind of a take two, in the subject matter being the same. We're just continuing the fight.
Okay.
And what you're saying is that you wanted to take a slightly different angle on it, just kind of based on what we said last time, and that's fine. If you want to take a different angle on it, I'm fine with that.
Okay, well then, do we want to? I don't know. I don't want to waste a week. Do we want to step back and reevaluate how we want to I mean, because I don't want us to fall back into, well, I suppose we got nothing to lose.
Right. Yeah.
If we're gonna step back and maybe come back to it next week, then, like I said, we have nothing to lose. We can just try, we can just try it out this week. But I want to, before we go into it, I want to know kind of what we're talking about here. And I also don't, and I know that you are sensitive to the, not in a bad way, but you're sensitive to the,
the third horn. Yeah.
Well, no, to atheists, hiding. And I don't want to give that impression. I don't want to.
I don't think that you. I don't. But see, here's the thing. That I know that that's not the case. Of course. You don't think that, do you? You don't think that I think you're dodging things, do you? I mean, heck, you're the one who engaged me to begin with. You know what I'm saying? Like, there's no way I could possibly think that you're trying to dodge any of the questions because. Okay,
well, that's fine.
With me.
But when I said that I'm not defending naturalism here. It was not my intent. That's what I thought. I didn't want you to think that I was stepping back from anything there.
No. I understand.
If you want to make this I have to support naturalism, we can. That would be different than kind of what I was thinking here.
Yeah, because I guess I see your point. I'm just trying to figure out like how this would go. It's very nuanced. You know what I'm saying? Uh-huh. And so, at least for me, it is. I almost feel like it would fall back into kind of the same, some of the same arguments and some of the same. You know what I'm saying? I don't know if that's the case or not. Mm-hmm. I mean, we could give it a shot. I mean, we could give it a shot with kind of what you're talking about, and then we could see how it goes.
Well, how about we do this? How about we do this? If let's proceed under the assumption that all I'm trying to do here is question. I mean, that's really been my position from the start, and I think we had a confusion on this during the times that we've tried recording the the episode 1 discussion, and that is that I'm not trying to defend a particular position. I'm not trying to defend a naturalistic position, although I will if you want me to. But the way I've been structuring my thought and my argument is, you say you have evidence for God, and I say you don't.
Yeah, okay? See, I don't particularly care for that because I'm constantly on the defense. And maybe that's why we've had the confusion, because mm-hmm. I've just been playing offense too. You know, I mean, I think I've just been going back and forth with no regards to the like. So mm-hmm. Maybe that's where some of the confusions come in, because I don't like. I like the arguments being both two-sided. Right. You know,
that's fine. How about this? How about, I mean, because we're addressing your claim, right? You're claiming that there's a God, and that's what we're addressing, and that's why you're feeling like you're on the defensive, because you are, because it's your claim. Now, I want to be fair though, and if you want to, if you want me to defend something in particular, that's fine. I'm cool with that. And I'll tell you if I believe it. And if I believe it, then I'll defend it. And so I'm okay with that. But, I just wanted to clear that up first. When we're talking about your claim and there's a God, that's your claim. Right. Okay. And so I
want your claim to be there's not a God, or I don't claim there's a God. I don't believe there's a God.
Okay.
Right? You believe you don't believe there's a God, and right, I believe there's a God. So let's go at it from that vantage.
Right. And so to do that, what I'm saying is that you don't have a rational basis. And so in order for me to say that, I don't necessarily, I don't have to make a case that something else is true. All I have to do is make a case that your argument does not hold water. That's what I'm arguing here. And once we get to a place where, so let's say, for example, theoretically, obviously, that let's say I do make that case that your argument doesn't hold water, that you can't support a belief that there's a God. Mm-hmm. First of all, I would throw a party and invite you over and buy you a bus ticket.
Plane ticket, first class. I'll be in morning. Okay.
Okay. All right. Deal. It's a deal. But once we get to that point, then we can talk about, okay, well, what does it make sense to believe in then? If we can't support this belief, well, what can we agree on? What can we?
Yeah, I'm not sure I like that. There? Yeah, I'm not sure I like that. Like I said, because it does seem one-sided. Now I know you're not that way, but I don't want I want our podcast to be a back and forth. Not just, he claims something. He claims there's a God. Well, let's see this evidence for such. I want it to be what best, gosh dang it. Why is this word keep slipping my mind? What best explains objective moral values and duties? Naturalism or theism? What best describes the beginning of the universe? Like our first one, the beginning of the universe was, I think you even put it on the Word document, is it a natural cause or a supernatural one?
Right.
So you like you were saying, well, I think it's a natural cause, and I was saying, I think it's a supernatural cause, and so we were going back and forth. If I misphrased this on the outline, then I'll take the blame for that. But what I was saying is, can we eliminate a natural cause? I wasn't making an argument that it was a natural cause. I'm saying, have we eliminated that as a possibility? Because don't you believe it was a natural cause?
I don't know.
So you right now, if you had to put money on it, you would say, I would split my bet. Half my bet, I think I'm 50% transcendent cause and 50% a natural cause.
No, I wouldn't say that at all. I'd say there's no reason to think that was a supernatural cause. If I had to put money on it,
right?
See, because I know that there are natural things. I can see natural things, but I don't have any reason to think that there are supernatural things.
Right. So if there are two, but I guess this is where this whole lack of belief thing comes in. Mm-hmm. If there are only two possibilities that we know of right now, that we could think of right now, well, let's discuss those. So you hold the view that you believe with some certainty that there's a natural cause of the universe, and I hold the belief that it was a supernatural cause. And let's go to town, and let's, what I'm saying. I
don't think that's what I'm saying. I don't think that's what I'm saying.
So, but.
It's kind of like
it's hard for me to want to do this when all I'm doing is playing defense. Like I want you to make a claim at some point. I want you to support something at some point. Like that's how I want it to go.
Well, then let's shift. Then, like I suggested in that discussion we had about the last time, the recording that we made about. I can't remember what the topic was, but I said one way that if that's frustrating for you, then let's switch the question. Let's change the question. Instead of saying, is it naturalistic versus supernaturalistic? Then let's change the question to, is there a reasonable argument for a supernatural explanation? For that, I will make a claim and I will say, no, there is not, or at least nothing that I have seen is a good reason. If you want it to be a two-way, I have to pick a side, I have to put my money down, then that's where I would put my money. That's the thing I would be comfortable saying is that
why couldn't we make
argument
it,
sorry, go ahead.
Why couldn't we make it something like like what I thought it was, like what is the best explanation for the universe, a natural or supernatural cause? And you take the natural cause, and I take the supernatural cause.
Because I'm not comfortable eliminating supernatural causes.
I know I'm not comfortable eliminating natural causes either, but I still try to do it. Like, I'm not 100% certain that there's a God. 99% certain, right?
Okay.
But I mean, anything is possible. Really, anything is possible. So, but I'm fairly certain it's a supernatural cause. Just like I think you would say you're probably fairly certain it's a natural cause. With what the evidence you think you have right now and your best evaluation of that. Boom. Like, I'm not trying to pin you
I would
on
say
something
that,
you don't believe. But
right. I would say that with the caveat that I know very little.
Well, that's fine. Let's caveat all. We could caveat all our podcasts if you want in that regard. Like, hey, listen, we are only privy to so much information. It could totally not be this, but this is what I think it is, and this is what I'm going to defend.
Okay.
I mean, if you don't want to do that, I mean, we could take a step back again, and we could try to reevaluate what would best suit.
So maybe I'm misunderstanding your position here. Maybe I should take my own advice and I should ask you and listen to what you have to say. So let me ask you this: do you know that there's a God?
I guess knowledge would require like a level of certainty, correct?
Mm-hmm. Right. But would you say that you know that there's a God? Would you be comfortable saying that? Here's
what I would say: I believe there's a God.
Okay.
And believe and know, I think, are two different. Know would be certainty. I know at least that I exist.
Mm-hmm.
Right. I think I could know that with a certain. I think that's what they would call like a properly basic belief. Right. So like I know that. But I believe there's a God. So it would be probably a little less certain than that. But I still feel comfortable making the claim there's a God.
Mm-hmm.
Does that make sense? So I think that's what a lot of naturalists believe too, that they would say, well, I mean, there might be something spiritual. I mean, like, you've been pretty upfront about that. Oh yeah, there might be, but I really do think it's something natural. I mean, I think that's probably what it best explains.
Let me ask you this. Let me ask you this then. Do you think that there are natural things?
Yes.
Okay. So we disagree on the first one. You believe that there's a God. I don't believe there's a God. We agree on the second thing. We both believe that there are natural things going on.
Right.
Okay. So don't you think that that's a difference? Don't you think that there's that's a tipping of the scales of some sort there?
Yeah, it just seems really awkward for me. I don't know if this is if I'm I don't know if this that seems weird to me to argue it kind of from that vantage, like that nuanced, like, well, there's this tiny little, or, there's this is the difference. And so we're going to argue this rather than just kind of taking the bigger picture look, or the looking at it, from the 5,000 foot survey and say, okay, here are the two main competing worldviews. And here's generally what they think.
Mm-hmm.
I'm going to take this worldview because this is what I believe, and Scott's going to take this worldview because this is generally what he believes.
Right.
And then we're both going to defend and try to eliminate. I don't say eliminate the other, but we're going to try to defend what we give evidence and support, and we're also going to try to show that the other person's claims or other person's evidence maybe is unfounded or false or whatever.
Well, here, let's try this on for size, okay? Here's a little bit from my perspective, okay? Listening to the way that you phrase it, and I'm not saying that you're wrong. I'm just saying it's a different perspective, okay? We're both looking at things from different points of view. We're looking at different parts of the elephant here, right? And so what you just said, the way you're describing it is, you have your worldview, I have my worldview, and we're butting them head to head to see which one's the better one, right? It's the natural versus the supernatural. Okay. Now here's what it looks like from my perspective. Okay. From my perspective is I'm saying that the natural world exists and functions. And you're saying that there's a natural world, but there's also the supernatural world. Okay, so if you look at it from that perspective, we both agree that there's a natural world, but you're saying that there's this extra thing. And so from my perspective, from my point of view, and you might disagree with our respective perspectives.
Right.
You might disagree with that point of view, but can you at least understand that that's how I'm seeing it?
Yeah, I do. I mean, I can't say that that's not how you see it. I mean, that's your perspective. But also what I'm saying, though, is I think the distinction isn't that we both agree there's natural and I only really think that there's supernatural at this point. The distinction is I don't think nature caused the universe. Mm-hmm. I don't think nature or we or matter can have objective moral values, could be an objective standard. Okay. I don't think that, you know what I'm saying? And so, whereas you're saying it can.
Okay. So let's look at that point. Let's take that one little point. Let's blow it up. Okay. So that's different than what you were saying before. If I'm saying we can have objective moral values in a naturalistic world, and I'm not saying that that's proof that naturalism is true.
Right.
What I'm saying is that it fits the description, quote unquote, right? It fits the, you know, how like if police are looking for somebody, they'll give a description. They'll give a handful of descriptors. 6'2", wearing a blue jacket and white shoes. Okay, so what I'm saying is that I have a model that's 6'2", wearing a blue jacket and wearing white shoes. Now I'm not saying, and I'm not saying that you're wrong. I'm saying that if you make an argument claiming that it's impossible for there to be naturalistic, objective moral standards, that's what I'm disagreeing with. That's the claim. If you claim that it's impossible for it to be natural, then that's what I'm disagreeing with.
Well, then why don't we do this? Why don't we both of our suspects fit the description? Now let's talk about which one better fits the description, or which one is the real suspect or the real murderer and the other one's just a suspect. Why don't we do that? So I'm saying that my guy fits the description. You're saying your guy fits the description, and now let's as detectives dig a little deeper and let's see which is the real murderer and which is just the phony baloney.
Okay.
Like what's your why do you feel hesitant
because again, it's I'm not saying that. I'm not making the claim that this is how we, this is it. I'm not saying that your explanation is eliminated here. What I'm saying is that it's reasonable to accept this as a naturalistic, objective moral standard. I don't know. Maybe
do you think it's reasonable for me to accept?
Maybe I'm in
supernatural?
violent agreement with you here. No. Maybe I'm making up a distinction here that's not there.
Well, no, there might be. That's why we're trying to flush this out. I don't want to. I don't want to proceed like in this particular one. I want to do this tonight, right? But I don't want to proceed into this particular one. Like if there's if we're kind of like off kilter, like we definitely have to be on the same page.
Okay.
Before we get in the swing of things. And that's like, to me, like listening to that, I have no idea what you believe now. You know what I'm saying? Like I do.
Mission accomplished.
I do, but it seems just so shifty. Like, and it might just be that you're being technically right. Like, I know that there's burdens of proof, depending on who makes the claims and things like that. I was actually just listening to it makes it sound like I only listen to William Lane Craig. I swear to God, I listen to a lot of other people, but I was listening to him about he's like just below the Apostle Paul, maybe above the Apostle Paul. Anyhow, I don't
think Paul has a podcast though, so.
No, he did save, or no, that was Peter. 3,000 on the 5,000 on the day of Pentecost. Anyhow, he had William Lane Craig was saying that when he had a debate with I think his name was Eric Wheeler, Eric Wireland or Weirland or something like that. I know the guy. I saw him actually debate someone else. But when he had a debate with him, Craig used to argue that atheists have, or naturalism, or you can't have objective moral values without God. And that's what he believes. But in the debate, he decided, and they decided ahead of time that he wouldn't be defending that claim, that actually he was going to defend a much more modest claim that God best explains objective moral values.
Okay.
And so that way, Eric Wielenberg, that's his name. That way, Eric Wielenberg had to also defend why he believed that naturalism best explained objective moral values. They both believed that their position was right, and that neither one thought, well, there's no way that could be true. But they both were pretty honest with in the debate, thinking that their position was the right one. And so they both had a burden of proof, but they also both went on the offensive too, to try to show that the other person's is lacking. And so there was this kind of, then that's actually how I thought all this kind of was. But see how it was kind of nuanced, and it was technically correct, even though it caught Wielenberg off a couple places because he was attacking a view that Craig wasn't
defending in that debate.
Right, which might seem like a crazy debate tactic. I don't think he meant it that way. He was just trying to take a modest view so that they could both have that burden of proof. And so that's what I'm saying with you, that maybe you're technically right. That in what you believe, that you we both believe in the natural, but I believe also that there's the supernatural. So then I would then be making the claim that I need to defend.
Right.
I feel like a little spoiled kid though, but I don't like that. I mean, I don't think that makes for an interesting.
But that's part of making a claim, is you gotta go out on a limb, and you gotta do that. Now, there are some things I'm willing to make claims on, but knowing the nature of the universe is not one of them.
So you're not willing to as an atheist, a naturalist, you're not willing to make the claim that it was a natural cause to the universe?
I'm not making
if not, then that must seem like, see, that's why I'm confused.
I'm not claiming to know anything.
Right. You're talking like an agnostic. Like, hey, I'm not taking any position here. You're the one with the burden of proof. And I don't want to do that. I want us both to have positions we believe in and have to support. Because so what would you be willing to,
so then we need,
what are things that you believe?
Well, one thing that if I don't want to make this about naturalism, because again, the way I'm looking at it is, we both think that there's this one thing, and you're saying that there's this other thing also. Okay. And what I'm saying is, there's no reason for us to believe in this other thing also. This thing that we already both believe in is sufficient. Okay. And so what I am willing, if you want it to be a head-to-head back and forth,
you are making a claim. You are making a claim that naturalism sufficiently explains what we see, and I'm saying that.
But that's different. That's not excluding the possibility. That's not excluding the possibility. I'm saying that I'm saying that there's no reason to think that there's this extra thing. Just like you don't think it would make sense for somebody to say, well, we have the natural world, of course, and then we have God, of course, but then we have also this other thing, God's mom or whatever, whatever you want to call it. There's this other thing above that. And you're like, that's ridiculous. We don't need we don't need that. God already explains everything there. That's enough of an explanation. There's no reason to think about God's mom or God's drunk Uncle Joe or whatever.
Right. But so if I was defending God's mom, the position, there's the natural, the supernatural, and God's mom. Mm-hmm. Say I was, or let's just use abstract objects. How about that? That makes more sense. So let's just say I'm defending natural, supernatural, and there's Platonic realm of abstract objects out there. And so I'm defending that, and you're saying, hey, there's no reason that there's this realm because what we see now, best, it can account for that. Well, what if I say it can't account for it? Then you're going to have to give reasons why it can't account for it.
Okay.
You're going to have to say, well, naturalism accounts for it because X, Y, or Z. You see what I'm saying? So yeah, I say there's the natural too, but what I'm saying is the natural can't account for these objective moral values, and you're saying, yes, it can. Mm-hmm. And I'm saying, okay, that's your claim. You're saying naturalism can account for these things, and I'm saying
here's something I'd be comfortable with. Okay, what's making me uncomfortable is I've told you that I'm a methodological naturalist, and that it feels like you're expecting me to defend philosophical naturalism, which is not a position that I hold. Remember, philosophical naturalism is the a priori belief that there's just no supernatural, and so forget about it. Whereas methodological naturalism is, well, this is what we got, right?
Right.
We got these natural senses and we got these natural things. This is what we got to work with. So for the time being, that's what we're going to work with because that's what we have. And so I don't want to defend philosophical naturalism because that's not a position that I hold, unless we want to have like a mock argument, which I think would be kind of a waste of time. So if you want to make it a head to head, let's do this. So let's argument.
Let me just real quick go back to the philosophical methodological business. Mm-hmm. The thing is, though, is that I'm then a methodological theist. In that, I'm not ruling out the possibility of the natural. Basically, all you're saying as a methodological naturalist is that you have some sense of certainty about certain things, and some uncertainty about others, but you fall into a certain camp. So you could wear the hat of a naturalist because you think that's right from what we know. And I could wear the hat of a theist because I think that's right based upon what we know. So all the differences between a philosophical naturalist and a methodological is the fact that the philosophical naturalist won't ever convert. He won't even ever look at evidence for, at least with a methodological naturalist, he'll say, hey, I'll give you guys a fair shake. But it doesn't mean you don't hold any particular worldview. You're a naturalist. But it doesn't mean that your opinion can't change because you hold that. I mean, if I'm a theist, but my position could change, I could deconvert and become something else, or become a naturalist. Mm-hmm. So I'm not asking you to hold the philosophical naturalist position. I'm just asking you to defend a view. But I think that phrase there, phrase there, defend a view, that is what's pushing it into the philosophical naturalism. No, because methodological naturalists defend views all the time. If not, then they're agnostic. Then they just don't hold views. I just don't hold a view. I just don't, you know what I'm saying? Like, the only distinction I see between the two is one at the beginning says, nope, no way, never, I'm not even considering it. and the other one still holds the naturalist position, but they say, I'm open to whatever ends up being the truth.
See, I think there's the disconnect right there.
Okay, all right. So tell me what the disconnect was.
So the disconnect is, from at least from my point of view, is that the methodological naturalist is not saying, how did you phrase it? I still hold this view, but I'm willing to change.
Right.
Okay. That's not what I'm saying. I'm not saying that I hold a view. What I'm saying is we want to learn about the world, and these are the tools that are in front of us. And so this is how we learn about the world. What the philosophical naturalist is saying, okay, we want to learn about the world. We have these tools in front of us, and there's no reason there are no other tools available. There are no other tools out there at all. And what the methodological naturalist is saying, well, these are the tools that we have on us, and so this is what we're going to proceed with.
Right. I see no distinction. You're working with the same toolbox.
You're working with the same toolbox.
You're just open to the possibility that there might be other tools. So you're a naturalist, but you're open to the possibility there's something else.
Right.
The philosophical atheist is a naturalist who says, nope, there is nothing else. So, yeah, you hold the position. You are a naturalist. You're a humanist naturalist. And so bring certainty into any point here. Like, you don't have to be 100% certain to hold a view. I'm a Christian, but I'm not 100% certain.
See, that's the point. It's not about beliefs.
What's it about then?
It's about, we want to learn about the world, and these are the tools we have, so this is how we proceed.
Do you see how hard this is for the theist? Do you see how hard this is for the theist? Do you see how it looks like you're jumping to and fro? I can't pin you down on any freaking thing. Do you see how at least I would see that as being that way?
Definitely.
I mean, I know you.
Definitely.
You, so I know you're not like that. But I'm like, what the heck do you believe then? Like, what do you believe? Do you make any positive claims?
What do I believe about what?
What do you believe about, I don't know, objective moral values?
I believe that a naturalistic standpoint can provide a reasonable standard for a reasonable objective standard for morality, and that I will argue.
Do you think that a theist can provide a reasonable basis for objective moral values?
No.
Okay, so you then support the position that exactly what you said, and I'll support the position that theism can do the same thing, and I'll argue why I don't think that naturalism provides a better basis, and you argue why theism doesn't provide a better basis.
Well, my argument's going to be one sentence, and that is, well, you haven't provided a reasonable argument to believe that there is a God. I mean, that's what it's going to boil down to is that. Now, what we can do is what we could, if you want to make it, here's kind of a mixture of what I'm saying and what I'm imagining that you're saying, and you can correct me if I'm wrong. What we can talk about is kind of what I thought, not what I thought we were talking about, but what I think that you thought we were talking about. And that is, does it make more sense to use a theistic standpoint as to form an objective moral standard, or does it make more sense to use a naturalistic standpoint to put together an objective moral standard?
That's fair.
Am I
that's
off?
Fair, but no, that's fair. But I'm failing really, other than semantics, I'm failing to see the distinction between what you just said and I think that naturalism is the best explanation for objective moral values. And then I say I think theism is the best. I fail to see the distinction between those two things.
I guess And maybe I am making maybe I'm nitpicking a little too much here, but I just, even the way that you say it is an explanation for objective moral values. Okay.
Is a better explanation. Yes.
But
you don't think naturalism is a better explanation for objective moral values than theism?
I don't think I agree with the way that you're phrasing the sentence. I don't think moral values exist as like a thing. Okay, it's not like some kind of force in the world or something like, it's not like a thing. It's not something that requires an explanation. Objective describes a particular standard. It's either objective or it's not. There's a thing here. It's either objective. You can describe it objectively, or is it a subjective thing? And the second thing is, does it make sense to use that as a standard for morality?
So you don't see any reason why the naturalist would have to defend his position that there's an objective basis.
No, what I'm saying is that morality is not something that is caused. Okay, it's not like God sat up at his desk and said, I need to come up with some kind of morality here. I need to come up with a proper way to do things, and then made his list. Okay, we have actions that we do, and we can describe them as moral or immoral. Now, does it make sense to use this standard to describe things as moral, or does it make more sense to use this thing to describe them as moral? Okay, so morality is not like a thing. Okay, morality is it's a way of describing actions. It's a way of describing. You can describe an action as being moral or immoral, just like you can describe a ball as being red or not red. Okay, and
right.
Now and so if we want to describe a ball as red, there's various ways that we can measure it. Is it red or is it not? We can compare it to a color chart. We can measure the wavelengths of the light being reflected off of it. We can spin this spinner of colors and see which one pops up. Some of those make sense to determine whether it's red. Some of those make less sense.
Right. But we're talking about is ought. Mm-hmm. You're telling me what something is. Mm-hmm. You're telling me that morality is this. Mm-hmm. It is that.
Right.
But I'm telling you that we all have a sense of what ought to be.
Right. And
that we ought to do certain things. And if you have an ought, you have to have an ought giver. You have to, because if you don't have an ought, if you don't have an ought giver, you can't have an ought. You just have what is. What is the case?
I disagree with that. With that.
So we have to figure out what kind of verbiage you would be comfortable with, so that we can make this happen.
Right.
Because I feel like it's hard to pin you down, and maybe you're being very technically correct, and maybe I'm just ignorant of that. Maybe I just don't know enough about formal arguments to know that you're being extra careful and very, you're doing things very precise, mm-hmm. as to have these good discussions.
Right.
That could be the case too. Right. It could be based off my complete ignorance. I'm just going off of what I've heard every other debate that I've listened to about objective morality. Mm-hmm. Most of the time have been what best describes or what best explains objective moral values, naturalism or theism.
So, speaking of the is ought issue, I did mention in the notes here, I think I put, where did I put? Moral duties arrive from the fact that we're a social species. And I put that on there because it didn't come up at the beginning of the part one, right? We talked briefly about moral actions and moral obligations, but that never. And I was ready to talk about it, but it never came up, and that's fine because we had plenty of other things to talk about. But I put a note on there because I wanted I wanted you to know that that's kind of what I was thinking. So here's my take on the is ought issue, and this could frame the discussion as well. Is that ought doesn't mean anything without a goal in mind. Okay, so let's say you're holding some cards in your hand. Let's say you have 5 cards. Okay, you have a jack of diamonds, a 2 of spades, and some other cards or whatever.
We've been through this.
Yeah, right. And
we've been through this. It doesn't matter what cards I have in my hand if I have no idea if I'm playing poker or
exactly. So when you're deciding what you ought to do, it depends on what your goal is. Okay, if your goal is to win poker, then you ought to, go for pairs or whatever, however you approach your poker. If your goal is to go fish, then, you're going to have a different strategy. If your goal is to play, if your goal is to murder the person sitting across the table, then what you ought to do is drop the cards, pick up that knife that's right next to you and thrust it forward. Right. So the ought, ought by itself is meaningless. Ought, you need to have a goal in order to determine what the ought is. Okay, just like the word value doesn't, or useful. Okay, something can be useful to accomplish a particular goal. Okay, a Swiss Army knife is, you might be able to say that it's useful in many circumstances, but it's not all that useful in a gunfight, just like the old saying, don't bring a knife to a gunfight. Okay, so It's not going to be useful in a gunfight or like a nuclear war, that kind of thing. And so those kind of relational type of judgments ought to.
Right.
Should.
You have to have goals
value.
in mind.
That kind of thing. So there has to be a goal. So when you just say a raw ought, okay, you're describing what is. How do you get to what ought? Okay, so then we have to think of that in the context of a goal.
Okay.
So so where would we go from there?
So whose goal? Whose goal? Like, right? Is that where you're going with that? Like, whose goal, or like?
I'm just.
That would be my next question. What kind of goal?
Well, it depends what we're talking about. If we're talking about morality, right? We're talking about, being good, about being helpful. Let's look at the things that we describe as being moral, and we can infer the goal from those things.
Yeah, but in order to have ought, there has to be some authority. There has to be some kind of authoritative.
Well, authority can be the reality of the situation. If I want you to split a log, if we're camping and I want you to split a log, and so ought you use the hatchet or ought you use this spool of fishing wire? Okay. Well, you ought to use the hatchet. Well, who said that? Who made that rule? Who dictated that? It's the reality of the situation that dictated.
Right. But I think what we're talking about, though, is we're talking about moral duties that we are enforcing upon other people. That you would want to hold the Germans accountable for the slaughter of the Jews.
Mm-hmm.
And so in order to do that, you have to have some kind of basis for that. It can't. I'm talking about an ought that has some kind of backing behind it. Not should I ought to use a hammer or ought to use fishing line.
Mm-hmm.
Like that's just a question of pragmatic issues, and it doesn't. I'm not trying to make any kind of judgments upon anybody else based upon what I ought to use.
Mm-hmm.
That's a different kind of ought.
Mm-hmm.
I'm talking about the ought where we can hold people culpable and accountable. So we both believe that there's some objective things out there, and we both believe people ought to be held accountable.
Mm-hmm.
So the question is we're talking about that kind of ought. I don't know if there's maybe I had to look up ought in the dictionary. I don't know if there's certain philosophical distinctions. There might be, because this is the kind of ought I'm talking about. I don't think that we can hold people accountable. We don't hold certain animals. We don't hold any animals accountable for stuff, except for dogs for biting people. But we don't, a monkey steals a takes a banana from another monkey, doesn't steal it, just takes it. We don't hold the monkey accountable because he has no oughts. He's just acting as he does in the wild.
Well, we hold them accountable to the degree that they can understand what they're doing.
Well, see, I think you'd have to
because it wouldn't make sense to hold them accountable because it wouldn't have any effect on them because they wouldn't understand.
So your
expectation.
You'd be saying then the oughtness depends on your level of sentience.
Right. Your ability to understand what is going on. So like you said, we train our dogs and we do hold them accountable. If they misbehave, then they don't get a treat, right? And if they behave correctly, then we do give them a treat. But we wouldn't hold a worm to that same level of expectation. We're not going to, it wouldn't make a lot of sense to say, oh, I'm not going to give you this little bit of fungus or whatever worm. I don't know. What do worms eat, right? So, it wouldn't make a whole lot of sense because the worm doesn't understand. And so we do have, obviously a dog is way below human level of understanding. And so that's why there's that apparent difference because we don't have a lot of pretty smart. I mean, dolphins, of course, are smart. Chimpanzees. There are things that are smarter than other non-human animals, but they're still way behind human beings.
Right.
Okay. But likewise, a worm would be way behind where a dog is. A dog can understand way more than what a worm can. It's just purely stimulus response. And well, of course, we could make the argument that more complicated thinking is just more complicated stimulus response, but that's a separate episode.
Right. Oh boy, that's like many episodes tangled into one, and I think that I would probably learn a lot more in that episode than I would be dishing out for sure. But I think that we're talking about all this stuff, and I feel like we're not getting a podcast in. It makes me kind of mad. Like, I know that this is important to hurdle, but I just.
You know what I think?
What's that?
I think we just recorded an episode.
You think so? What do we call this sucker?
I don't know. I think we just got one right there. I think we still have more to do. That. I think we still have.
Man, I'm so glad I told you to press play.
Yeah.
Well, this shows how people can work through, and I don't think we're done, of course, working through this, some of this nuanced things, but I'm glad that we are because we could show people that, like, hey, listen, you could disagree and you could work through stuff and not hate people.
Mm-hmm.
Like, you know what I'm saying? And not like, and not have like that. Because the whole time that I was doing that, and the whole time we were talking, I may have had like my voice may have raised, but it's just my personality, right? So like I was never at any point mad.
Oh, I didn't get that impression at all. I didn't get that at all.
I know. Yeah. Good because I want our listeners to see that too. Like right? Like
now that you know there's going to be an episode, now you're like brushing off your shoulders and I'm
backtracking.
right. No, I know what you mean. I know what you mean. Yeah.
So okay, yeah. So where do you want to go from here with this?
All right. Well, let's. I think we can reframe. I think we're going to have a part 3 of this now. I think.
Okay.
Let's call this one a wrap. Okay. Let's. I think what we did. I don't know. To me, this peek into our process, to me, I think would be fascinating.
Yeah,
I think.
Yeah, it would. I don't know what we call it, but I almost feel like it was a hurdle. We've had many hurdles, and this was kind of a hurdle that we've. Yeah, it hasn't been like a sparring match. It's been like a hey, you and I both have to cross this creek,
right?
So let's find a way to do that.
Yeah, let's get wet. Okay, so yeah, I know. Yeah, right. And so. I don't think we need to worry about what to call it. I think that'll come to us. But I think we just recorded a damn episode, and I think that's going to be a good one.
All right, good. Well, then that makes me feel better. And there you have it, gang. That was your behind-the-scenes look at the God or Not podcast.
Right.
Jamie and Scott at their best. Sarcasm. But I'm glad you guys were able to listen in and hear real world conversation between two guys trying to get along and yet still trying to hold some ground and defend their position. And so we hope that you enjoyed kind of the back to scenes. What do you think? How'd that go, Scott?
Good. I like the way that you just phrased it. The two guys trying to figure it out. It reminded me of The Odd Couple, the intro to The Odd Couple, where at the end, I'm giving away my age here, but The Odd Couple with, Oscar Madison and Felix Unger, right? I don't know. You know the show I'm talking about?
I do, only because
Please
I
tell
watch
me
it
you've
on
at least
the
heard
old
of it.
person classics.
Okay. So anyway, so at the end of the intro, they say, can these two guys learn to live with each other without killing each other, or something along those lines?
Yeah.
And so that totally reminded me of this. And incidentally, do you remember when we first started talking about the podcast,
Yes.
we talked about possibly trying to use that intro, the music, for the, and it turned out that wouldn't have been very cost effective.
It wasn't going to work. But I do remember that, and that's kind of what we're doing here. And so that's what you got. That's what you guys got with this. So
that was that. Yep.
Then the next now we're moving on to a little side bit that we call low blow. And low blow is just something that either I or Scott believe that was a low blow. It's something that might be a misconception or something that we think somebody didn't get. They didn't get it right. And
something that just irks you.
It's just a low blow. Like, come on, man, that was a low blow.
Right.
And so we want to set the record straight. And so up next we have Scott, and he's going to do a little bit on what we call low blow.
Ooh, low blow.
Okay, so for this low blow today, I wanted to talk about a common misconception on the definition of atheism. I see this a lot, especially discussions online where you don't really know the other person, and there's certain assumptions made when somebody calls themselves an atheist. And so I just wanted to kind of flesh out a little bit how the word is used commonly nowadays, and the way that I use it is to mean basically an atheist is just not a theist. It's just somebody who does not buy or accept the theistic claims made by, a theist. Mm-hmm. And I think that from my experience with atheist organizations and so forth, I think that's a pretty common way of viewing it, at least from within the atheist community,
right? If
there is an atheist community.
Oh, there is.
And so, yeah. Well, I mean, there might be multiple, many atheist communities, but from my experience, that's kind of the approach. And what we're saying is, I'm not asserting that there's no God. I'm not saying I know for a fact, or I even believe that there's no gods. What I'm saying is that I don't believe that there is a God. And one example that I think is pretty commonly used is if I asked you, if I told you I have a certain number of whole dollar bills in my pocket, do you believe that they're an even number of dollar bills or an odd number of dollar bills? And so
I'm atheistic on that point.
Exactly. My point exact. Yeah. So you don't really have any reason to believe that there's an even number of dollar bills. And so you wouldn't believe that. But that doesn't necessarily mean that you're on the side of the odd number of dollars. Even though there's only two possibilities, it must be an even number or an odd number. Just because you don't accept that it's an even number of dollar bills does not mean that you are believing that it's an odd number of dollar bills. Same thing with a God. There's only two options. There either is a God or there isn't a God. And just because I don't believe that there is a God, it does not mean that I am pushed over to the other side saying that I believe that there is no gods. Now, there are atheists that would classify themselves as being definitely believing that there's no gods for various reasons. And they would also be an atheist. They're still also not an atheist, but it's just a different flavor of atheist. Just there's different flavors of atheists, just like there's different flavors of theists. And so the reason that I wanted to bring this up as a misconception is that if you're talking to an atheist, don't make assumptions. Don't assume that you know what they believe. Just like if I were talking to you or to a Christian or to somebody who I didn't know anything about their religion, I'm not going to make assumptions about what they believe. I'll ask them. Even if I think I know, then I think it's a safe bet to just ask, just to verify. And so if you're talking to somebody, even if they've called themselves an atheist, I know that there's long history of this word, and it's been used in a couple different ways for a long, long time, way back to antiquity. But I think it's just common courtesy. Just don't make assumptions about what the other person believes, even if they use words that you think that they might use it differently.
Right.
What are your thoughts? What are you thinking on this?
Well, I mean, I think it's fair that we shouldn't assume what other people think. Typically the definition of atheism, I think the most commonly used throughout history is just the belief there is no God. So I think I only have two objections. I don't even know if you want to call them objections to the misconception. Because, listen, if you want to call yourself whatever, you can call yourself that. I'm all right with that. The first objection is I think that kind of the definition we're talking about here, kind of this lack of belief or just not necessarily believing in a God is really broad. It paints a real broad brush and includes a whole lot of people, because I guess under that definition, I mean, babies would be atheists, and rocks would be atheists. And sometimes I think maybe that definition is encroaching a little bit upon like agnostics. And I know that normally agnosticism is tends to be defining more of a kind of a belief in terms of knowledge, like a claim to knowledge. But a lot of times too, at least in my camp, we kind of look at things as, you have theists on one side and atheist on the other, and then the agnostic in the middle. The theist makes the claim that there is a God, and to a certain level of probability or certainty. So you may be a theist who is about 75 or 80% certain that there's a God, but you would still call yourself a theist. And then on the opposite end, there would be an atheist, and level of certainty, I don't think really would come into play there. You either believe there's a God or not, and atheists believe there isn't a God, and maybe they're 75% certain that there isn't a God, and they leave the rest open. And then the I think a lot of the people would fall in the middle, would be agnostic. Either they don't know if there's a God, well, it could go one way or the other, or they have they say, well, there's just no way for us to know. And so that's kind of traditionally how I've seen things. So I think that would probably be kind of my first objection, is that it kind of squeezes the agnostic out a little bit and kind of paints a little wider brush. But I do agree with you in that if somebody wants to classify themselves as something, I'm okay with that. The other thing that it kind of get brought up is this kind of the burden of proof. And so
let me pause you 1 second there.
Sure.
Let's come back to that. Let's come back to that burden of proof issue. But before we go on, I just wanted to comment and say that I thought that what you just said was fair. I think that's perfectly fair. And I think this cuts both ways. I think just as I'm asking somebody talking to me not to make assumptions based on just the fact that I call myself an atheist. And by the way, I would call myself an atheist and an agnostic. I feel I'm an atheist because I don't believe that there's a God, and I'm an agnostic because I don't know for sure either way.
Right.
But I would say it cuts both ways, and this would also be an appeal to atheists. Even if you're used to using the term one particular way, I think it's fair to understand that other people use it in different ways, some of which are perfectly legitimate, are fairly common. Like you said, there's a long history of using the word as atheist to mean somebody who believes that there's no God. I would argue that there's just as long of a history for my definition, but that's not the point that I'm trying to make here. Just as if somebody's approaching you and starts talking to you, don't assume that just because you say that they're an atheist that they know what you mean.
Right.
So just like I'm asking the person talking to me to ask me what I believe, I would also appeal to myself and say I shouldn't assume that they know what I'm talking about.
That's fair.
And so, and I think what's important here is not that we label things with the right label. What I think is important is that we understand where we stand on this issue, and if we're using labels if that's obstructing our communication, then that's a problem. The labels shouldn't be obstructions. They should be helping to facilitate communication. And if they're not doing that, then you got to do something different. So,
right. And I think that comes down to clarification. So if you want to paint yourself with that broader brush, I'm fine with that. It's just going to be one of those things where I'm probably going to have to clarify. I'm going to have to say, well, what exactly do you mean? And just communicate. And
right.
So I think that's fair. If, like I said, if you want to call yourself whatever, I'm fine with that as long as we are able to clarify exactly what you believe.
And I would do the same thing for if I was talking to a Christian, because there's lots of different groups of Christians, and many of them would call the other ones not Christians.
Right.
And so so just because somebody tells me they're a Christian doesn't necessarily mean that they're the same type of Christianity that I grew up with.
I'm a heretic.
Same type of Christianity that you grew up with.
I'm a heretic to some, right.
So, I can't make assumptions about what they think about hell or what they think about this, that, or the other thing. But anyway, we're getting off track here. Let's go back to what you were saying about burden of proof, because I think that's an important thing to touch on.
So
here.
The burden of proof, just in my experience, I've dealt a lot of times with atheists where I'll get into a dialogue either online or in person, and I'll be basically playing defense the whole time. They're throwing questions at me and this and that, and then when I push back, I'll usually, or not usually, but in some cases, get the response of, "Oh, well, I didn't make a claim. I just lack a belief in God. You're the one claiming that there's a God, so you have to provide proof." And for me, that just seems unfair. I have a worldview and a set of beliefs, and I'm willing to defend those beliefs. And if you're going to dialogue with me, then that means either you agree with me or you don't. And in either case, I would expect for you to provide some kind of argumentation or reasons for how you believe. So that was the other kind of objection. Is a lot of times that's what I'll see happen is they'll kind of throw that up as a shield so that they don't have to defend what they believe, and they're just constantly on offense, and I'm constantly playing defense, and I'm like, well, hey, this is just not a fair conversation. Now that's obviously not like that with everybody. But that's just an experience I had. And that was kind of what was holding my feet to the idea that atheism is a worldview. So I was held to that belief because I felt so strongly that atheists do have a set of beliefs, that they are asserting things. And it took me a while to understand that atheism isn't a worldview. It is a belief within a worldview. And when I was able to kind of look at it in that light and say, that's fine, I'll consider atheism a belief within a worldview, I'm completely fine with that as long as you're willing to defend it. And so that is kind of my objection in terms of using that word as almost like a barrier for communication.
Right, yeah. And I think that's a fair approach too. I think the label that you put on yourself should not be used to avoid your burden of proof for cases where you do have a burden of proof. Now, I would disagree with you in saying that atheism is a belief within a worldview. I would say more that atheism is a description of a person's position on one particular question. that might just be 6 of one, half dozen of the other, but that's kind of the way I would phrase it. And as far as the burden of proof, I do think that it is not intellectually honest to if you're using your label to avoid engaging in defending on what you believe. Now, but you have to realize that that people don't have beliefs on every topic. Okay, there's going to be some topics where you have beliefs and some topics where you don't.
Right.
Like, for example, the dollar bill thing in my pocket, right? You don't have a belief on that one way or the other. And so one thing I think that would be helpful when engaging, if it appears that somebody is running from a discussion or refusing to give as much as they get, this might just be one of the claims that you have a belief on and they don't. And if that's the case, then on that particular subject or that exact question, it might be that the atheist doesn't have a burden of proof. There might be other questions where you don't have a burden of proof if you don't have a belief on a particular thing. So try to recognize, okay, are they running from the discussion, or are they saying what they are they talking about their sense of or their state of mind in this case in regards to this one question. Now, having said that, another thing that I would suggest would be to maybe rephrase the question. So if you and I are talking about is there a God? Mm-hmm. Okay, so your answer is yes, and I don't really say yes. I don't really say no. I'm not convinced yes. That's in statistics, we call that failure to reject and failure to support the hypothesis.
Right.
Okay. It's kind of like, on those surveys where you put like strongly agree,
right,
strongly disagree. And then there's always one in the middle, no opinion one way or the other.
Right.
Or in this case, it would be no belief one way or the other.
It just seems that typically that would be called agnosticism.
Right. But, and that goes back to what I was saying earlier. If you want to call that agnosticism and I'm having a discussion with you, I'm fine with, you can call it whatever you want as long as I know what you mean when you say it.
Right.
But if we rephrase the question, we can put it in a different situation where it's not just all sure. You on the defense.
Right. So we got here somehow. How do you think we got here? Based on what method? I mean, that's just a broader question that would both put both people in a position where they would, if they make a claim, they're going to have to support it. Right.
Yeah.
I mean, that's all.
True. That would be one way to change the question into something that would be a little more two-sided. Another way, a little bit more subtle, that would be a little more kind of really changing the question to a different kind of question. Is there a God? Yes or no? Versus, how do you think we got here? Okay, so that's kind of changing the context a little bit, but we can even just do a slightly more subtle tweak if you changed it to. Instead of saying, do you believe there's a God? You could say something like, do you think that this is a reasonable argument for God? That would be something that, so like, for example, let's say you had argument X. You're saying argument X supports the belief that there's a God. And if in order for me to, that would be something that I'm more likely to say, no, I don't think it's a reasonable argument. And so in that case, I'm taking a stand on it. I'm saying, right. No, I believe that is not a reasonable argument. And so then you can turn around and say, why don't you think it's a reasonable argument? And that's so then fair. We can discuss, and then we can talk about the logic of it or the evidential support of it and that kind of thing. So that tweaks the question in such a way that we're still kind of approaching the same subject matter, but it's not all me just saying why like a 4-year-old.
So I guess it all boils down to communicating and asking good questions and letting your opponent define what they think and certain terms. And there is actually a lot of legwork that potentially could be done before a discussion even really gets off the ground. And so it's important
that if you're going to have these kind of really weighty discussions, sometimes they can't be done 5 minutes here or 5 minutes there. Sometimes it just takes a little more time so that you can get to know the other person's positions and try to represent them the best way that you can. So that you would be happy if they represented you in that fashion.
Right. And you talk about, legwork and spending time and that kind of thing, but a lot of times it actually saves time because then you're not spending so much time talking past each other.
Right.
It allows you to, you take a little bit of time investment at the beginning of the discussion and stop before you go on and say, okay, well, what do you mean by that? Make sure that you understand what the other person is saying. That way you're not arguing with, a straw man that you have constructed in your mind. You're not talking past each other. You're actually, talking head to head, which is, kind of the whole point, isn't it?
Yep. Sounds good, buddy. I think we may have come to some kind of, dare I say, consensus on that.
I think we do. All right. So that's this low blow.
And that about wraps it up for episode number 4. Please send us your ideas, questions, and comments to email at godornotpodcast.com. If you'd like to know more about the topics covered in this episode, Scott recommends
a book called Moral Origins, The Evolution of Virtue, Altruism, and Shame. And it's by a man by the name of Christopher Boehm. And he talks about just like it says, moral origins. He talks about how morality evolved and, how it began, how it has its roots set early on in our evolutionary history. And so it's moral origins. It's thick with science, but it's not overbearing. There's plenty of, he has a very big reference section, bibliography in the back. And so you can feel confident that it's very, well researched, but it's also written in such a way that it's accessible. And so that was Moral Origins by Christopher Boehm. What do you got?
Very good. I myself have How We Shall Then Live by Francis Schaeffer. And of course, Francis Schaeffer was a prolific Christian philosopher and teacher and author in the 70s, I think in the early 80s. And so he talks a lot about morality and culture and kind of how those two mesh. And so we just want to say thank you very much for joining us. We hope you'll be back with us next time when Scott and I will be talking about extraordinary claims require extraordinary evidence. Until then, this is your dialectic duo reminding you to talk to each other.
See ya.
This has been the God or Not podcast. Send your questions or comments to email at godornotpodcast.com. If you'd like to support the show or grab some God or Not gear, please visit the website at www.godornotpodcast.com. Thanks for listening.